Hey guys, this is Jody Roundhouse with the Roundhouse Report, and I am officially compelled to make this video. This is probably going to be the most important video, or one of the most important videos on this channel that I'm going to end up making. Today is May 23rd, 2020. I've been dangling this theory in my mind. This has to do with China and China's military breakout, the beginning of the war with China. I'll try to be as brief as possible, but you know how I roll. I've been dangling with this theory ever since the coronavirus thing started, and as more and more information leaks out as to how China handled the situation internally, and now what they've done in the interim while the rest of the world has struggled. I've been dangling this theory in my head, and I just watched a very compelling report with two pundits or analysts, whatever you want to call them, who I respect, especially one of them. She was the former national security or deputy national security advisor under Trump. To be brief, again, today's May 23rd, Saturday. On Wednesday, the White House released a bizarre, ambiguous thing on the whitehouse.gov website. Every year the United States, or every year or every 2 years, every year the United States comes out with a paper regarding its strategic approach to China. And this wasn't that, but it was along that same vein. It was just this random thing. It wasn't signed by anybody. It wasn't attributed to any department. It was just like a page that was thrown up on the White House website, and it was an ambiguous. Based on what I could tell, it generally said that we are going to engage in, what was the terminology? Competitive. Basically, we have officially, the Cold War with China has officially been acknowledged. It's been happening for years, the Cold War with China. Now it's officially been acknowledged and is now officially policy under the Trump administration. The thing that was thrown up on the news, or on the .gov website, basically was saying that we're going to have a competitive approach to China in the region as opposed to the status quo, what's been going on. We're now going to have a strategically competitive relationship, is what the document said. It was an ambiguous, bizarre kind of document. My theory that this report that I just watched freaking validated in my mind, which is why I'm like, I got to get on this, and I gotta post it so that I can be right before everyone else catches on, right? Because I'm telling you, I had this theory before I watched this, okay? Wuhan, because and the theory didn't come organically. It was just drawn from a number of sources, and I was just thinking about it, just critical thinking and putting everything together, and it's like, oh my goodness. All right, gray zone warfare, little green men, Putin, when he invaded Crimea. These dudes were troops. They were soldiers. They all had the same uniform. They were decked. They were decked out. They had tanks. They had freaking howitzers, but there were no Russian flags. So therefore, Putin said, these aren't Russian soldiers. These are volunteers. Huh. I can't do anything. It's plausible deniability. Everybody knew that was BS, but technically under international law, Russia didn't invade. There's no proof. They don't have Russian flags. Maybe they are volunteers. Plausible deniability. Iran does it. Iran will tell one of its affiliates in Iraq, listen, I want you to carry out an attack against this U.S. base. Iran told them to do it. Iran essentially carried out the attack, but they had their group do it, who very well consisted of like Iranian soldiers dressed as militia. But plausible deniability, Iran can say, we didn't do it. We may be connected with this group. We may have created it, but this a renegade group within the group is the one that carried out this attack against the U.S. base. Iran has plausible deniability. China, masterstroke, Putin's loving this, if this indeed is true, although Russia's been hit pretty hard by this coronavirus. But this thing happened in Wuhan province, coronavirus. Trump made a comment recently that there was not one case of coronavirus in Beijing. if you look at a map of China, Wuhan province is a couple hundred miles south of Beijing, it looks like. I'm looking at something really small here, but it looks like Wuhan province is relatively, it's about 200 miles south of Beijing. That strip of land there on the coast, that's the population belt of China. China has 1.6 billion people in it. The United States is about 350 million. China has, I think, 1.7 billion, 1.6 billion. And most of them are right here between Beijing, like Manchuria, Beijing, and then stretching down south. This part over here is where they set up the concentration camps for that the Turkoman Chinamen, the Wangers or whatever they're called. But the population belt's right here. Wuhan's here, and for some reason, Wuhan went on blast, 60,000 in like a day, but they managed to, with profound effectiveness, seal it. Because this massive population belt of 1 billion people in a densely populated small little spot here in China, yeah, Beijing got hit. They had tens of thousands of cases. But within about a week, it literally dropped down to zero. And this is based on now again, a lot of this, well, to a great extent is based on what the dictatorship under Xi Jinping, the new Mao Zedong, they're not giving true figures. So I did a little bit more research into it, and again, using critical thinking. Beijing is an open city, and it's a metropolis in the east. There's a bunch of reporters. The New York, say I work for the New York Times. China doesn't know I work for the New York Times. I live in Beijing. I keep an eye out. I scout around. I look around, and there's 1,000 people like me working for news outlets around the world in Beijing, and they're doing the same thing. They write under pseudonyms, so that way they can't be tracked down and taken away or killed or whatever. No one's been reporting about Beijing. I looked that up. There are 0 cases when I looked. The bar on the graph, and when this all started, inevitably it went to Beijing. But the graph went like this. It was like this, and then it went like that. But then it goes down like this. So for about a week or two, Beijing spiked, and it's about 60,000 if I recall correctly. But then within a week or two, it literally went down to 0, and then it flattened out. And if you go to the same source I went to, it's flat. There's no cases in Beijing. All those factories are, from what I can tell, my understanding was that the entirety of China was racked with coronavirus. That all the factories throughout China, Beijing, Wuhan, everything, were shut down. That was my understanding. Wuhan was locked down, but the rest of China had been racked by it. Apparently not. Wuhan got racked by it. Xi Jinping, China historically has little regard for human life, and they have so many people in China. They had a forced abortion policy, which I believe they lifted to a degree. They have very little regard for human life, so they sacrificed the people of Wuhan province. They got screwed. But they very, very effectively, systematically, and just profoundly efficiently locked it down quickly. They stopped internal travel in China. They stopped it as best they could. Again, Beijing did spike, but within a week or two, it went down to 0. According to the Chinese government, but again, all these different reporters, no one's reporting about, the hospitals in Beijing are packed. No one's reporting that. So when you look at the graphs, when you look at the figures, and when you look at a number of sources, and then when you're not getting reports of Chinese hospitals being packed by Western reporters who live in Beijing, when you take it all together and use critical thinking, that tells me that Beijing pretty much has 0 cases, just like Trump said, just like the graph says. It's freaking 0. It's like this, literally, okay? Wuhan is still all jacked up, but Wuhan province has been locked down and they've been isolated. There have been riots. They've been going after the military. I'm not sure where they stand now, but Wuhan got rocked. Wuhan province, south of Beijing, about 200-300 miles south, it looks like, based on that globe. So agitated, I forgot to light my cigarette. And I forgot the little, I gotta plug them. So plug. Alright, so anyhow, what it's looking like to me is I've been waiting for the war with China. Not a war, but the war. I've talked about it on this channel profusely. It's all over the channel. I talk about the war with China. I estimate within 5 to 10 years. I've been saying that for a few years, so now the timetable is even less. Whether it's a 3-day war or a 3-year total war, I don't know. But some kind of armed war, armed conflict, armed exchange, people die on both sides, war with China. Within 5 to 10 years. By 2030, it would have happened. Or will be ongoing. It would have, China's doing what Hitler did. They're slowly annexing pieces of territory. They came down on Hong Kong really hard. I've been sick. I've been out of the loop. I'm just now getting back into the loop. Apparently yesterday or a couple of days before, they just freaking came down on Hong Kong very hard. They smashed them. Everyone's focused on coronavirus, so they smashed down on Hong Kong for the first time, like Beijing did. They're very slowly, granted, Hong Kong's China. It's semi-autonomous, but it's part of China. But the next step, they've taken the South China Sea. That's de facto Chinese territory now, even though we're still operating in it. Within 5 years, depending on how the war goes, we may not be operating in it anymore. We'll see. But they're doing exactly what Germany did before World War II. They're solidifying their perimeter. The Germans took the Deutschland. They're part of Czechoslovakia, right? Then they take all of Czechoslovakia, and then they take this, and then they take that, and then they take Western Poland. And then they did the breakout, and they took all of freaking Europe, okay? Well, Western Europe, at least. And North Africa. And most of Russia. The Balkans. Yeah. Anyhow, the Chinese restricted internal travel. They locked down Wuhan. They restricted all other internal travel. Yet it seems to me like they systematically rounded up a whole bunch of people who were infected or that they intentionally infected, kind of like suicide bombers. And they systematically sent them into New York City. They systematically sent them into major airports, namely New York City. That's why New York City has become the epicenter, is the epicenter. The United States is now the epicenter. There's a reason for that. I believe they were systematically sent, not just to the United States, but to other places as well, the West. China wants to be the new West. China wants everything right now, for instance, NATO, the UN, the World Bank. Everything's based in New York City, and everything's based in the West. China wants that to be completely reversed. China wants it all to be China-centric, not America-centric. No more UN inside of New York City. They want the UN to be based in Beijing. They want everything to be centered around China. They want to have their own World Bank. In fact, I think they're in the process of starting their own World Bank based on their own currency. I'm not too familiar with economics, but they want to supplant the United States, the West, because Europe is the West, but they're a bunch of pussies. England to a lesser degree, but they don't have that nationalism that they need, and they don't have the military capabilities or resolve to a great extent to take on this challenge. But they're going to have to. Otherwise, they're going to fail. They're going to fall. They're going to have to rise to the challenge, otherwise they're going to fall. This isn't the United States anymore because they very deliberately, Europe was hit too, but to try to make it concise, as this woman put it, they attacked us with they did a biological attack with plausible deniability. It was a gray war zone, if this is true, it's freaking brilliant. Again, they don't care about their own citizenry, especially a bunch of freaking peasants and crap. They'll let them die in mass. They don't care, the Chinese dictatorship. So for them, it's no sweat off their back. But this attack, or rather, this is just stage one. Beautiful gray zone warfare, this brilliant. They managed to kill upwards of 100,000 Americans so far. They have halted our economy. They've halted the global economy. But not in China, apparently, not domestically. Apparently, it's just Wuhan that's really been hit by it. The rest of China's up and running. That's what it looks like. All the factories in Beijing are up and running. The rest of the world shut down. So they instituted this biological pandemic attack using the plausible deniability of, hey, this was an accident, this got out of a lab, etc., etc. We did our best, whatever. Everyone knows that they lied for 6 weeks. Everyone knows that they bought up all the ventilators, all the masks and gloves globally during those 6 weeks. And then it came out, and no one had anything because the Chinese had bought it all. Really messed up, everyone knows that. So these theories are not conspiratorial, and they're not fringe. They're very plausible. That's why I'm thinking that this is like the beginning of something, and it was corroborated by what I just watched. So I was like, I'm going to make a video on this crap. And again, I'm at, 15 minutes? No one's watching, but if you are, Mao, put a period, all right? Mao Zedong, Mao, put a period, all right? What was that? Mao, what was I talking about? I'm tired. What was I talking about? Okay, so they institute this, essentially a biological attack against the United States using the plausible deniability, oops, that was an accident. Meanwhile, when you look at the behavior on the macro level, it's like, no, it wasn't a freaking accident. No, this was a highly efficient, well done coup that they pulled off. They attacked us using plausible deniability. They killed 100,000 of us at least. They shut down our economy. They shut down the world's economy. Internally, apparently, the Chinese economy, although it's obviously been hurt very badly, their capacity to reboot has apparently not been. It's Wuhan. The rest of China apparently is doing relatively well. So once the world economy begins to reopen, they're already ready to go. So they launched a biological attack. They kill 100,000 Americans right out the gate. They shut down our economy. At the exact same time, I was just reading a bunch of articles about this, because again, I've been out of the loop. At the exact same time that this hit us, and that all the people were dying in mass, before people knew what was happening, they militarized the South China Sea. And if you look on a map, type in the Google 9-dash line. Look at the South China Sea. They the Spratly Islands. There are a few other little reef island clusters throughout the South China Sea. The main cluster is called the Spratly Islands. But there are a few others. There's 4 or 5 of them, and they militarized them. They dredged sand up, and they built islands out of these reefs, and they militarized them. And when the rest of the world, namely the United States, was like in panic mode, the Chinese surged all this stuff. There were already like anti-aircraft batteries on these islands. There were already anti-ship missiles on these islands. There were already military aircraft on these islands, etc. But then all of a sudden the Chinese surged all this crazy crap, forward warning systems, advanced sensors, all sorts of stuff. Like they just straight up surged in and south. They broke out. They just surged in everyone, because the Roosevelt and then the other aircraft carrier in the region, they were grounded. They were in port. One was in Guam, one was in Japan, or in Hawaii or in Japan. Remember the Roosevelt? And then the other ship. There were 2 aircraft carriers. The 2 aircraft carriers that patrolled that region, they were grounded for a long period of time because the crew members had coronavirus, remember? All right, so during that time period, they surged across the South China Sea, and they put all sorts of very advanced weapon systems and technologies all across the South China Sea in their holdings, all these little holdings that they have throughout the South China Sea, consolidating it. I mean, it's done now. They've straight up consolidated. They put forward warning systems, forward attack systems. I mean, it's done. It's fait accompli. And then the United States, now that we've recovered our capabilities, I believe the Roosevelt's back in service. I'm not sure about the other one, but regardless, we have been sending from other fleets around the world. We've been sending ship after ship after ship, including a Marine Expeditionary Unit. And look up an MEU, a Marine Expeditionary Unit assault ship. We sent one of those boys over there. They're filled with 3,000 Marines, in addition to the crew of the ship. So there's 3,000 combat-ready Marines. There's tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, limited artillery. There's helicopter pads on there. They have a few aircraft on there. The support ships, they have helicopter gunships, stuff like that. You land 3,000 Marines on a beachhead backed by Apache helicopters and freaking F-35s overhead. Yeah, so if you're talking about island warfare in the South Pacific, we sent one of those boys over there. That's what the USS America is what it's called. We sent that boy over there. That's a big warning, and we sent it right through the South China Sea. Right after that, we sent like 3 more huge ships, and then we sent an aircraft carrier strike group through there. That's almost unprecedented, because in order to send an aircraft carrier, you got to send about 5 or 6 very strong support ships, a strike group, to go along with it, because you're not going to send a capital ship, your aircraft carrier, into hostile territory. You're going to make sure that's protected. So a whole freaking fleet went through there in the last month or so. I'm not sure when, but we've had this rapid deployment. Boom, boom. Ships that don't ever go over there. They're never deployed there. They're elsewhere. They're just boom. The amphibious ship came with 2 other ships and just went right through the South China Sea. Then we sent a couple B-1 bombers, B-1, stealth, freaking high-tech heavy bombers, to scout out across the South China Sea out of nowhere. That is a shift that we've made. Apparently before, up until recently, we do routine patrols of the area. Now we're not doing routine patrols of the area. We're doing bizarre, nobody knows when it's going to happen, whether it's at night, whether it's at day, whether it's at 8 a.m., whether it's at 2 p.m. The time changes every day. Some days they don't do them at all. They just randomly send up patrol missions. That way it throws off the Chinese. Now there is no schedule anymore. They don't know what's going to be in the air, or when, or necessarily where. So all of a sudden there's 2 B-1s, and that's a heavy military asset. 2 of them, we sent 2 B-1s out to scout across the South China Sea. Everyone's like, WTF. Again, look up these news reports. We sent 3 littoral combat ships. I mean, I'm talking, we're like half a dozen ships. We just sent 1 after 3, and then we sent 3 more, and we just keep sending them. We sent 3 littoral combat ships. We parked a ship about 100 miles off the coast of China proper. We went right up through the South China Sea, and we parked right off of Shanghai, about 112 nautical miles off the coast of Shanghai. We just sat there and parked. The 3, the USS America, and then the 2 destroyers that were accompanying it. We just sat there and parked. That was like a week ago, 2 weeks ago. And we are publicizing the U.S. Navy, the Pentagon. We're putting out press release after press release. We're letting the world know. We're putting out pictures. We're showing everyone. We're like, yo, we're beefed up here. This is our response to what China did when our ships were up at port because our guys were sick and they couldn't be patrolling. This is our response. We're like, China, you did this when we were all laid up and we were getting racked domestically and all this. All right, this is our response. So now we have this, and this has been in the works for a long time. We've just been waiting for it to happen. Now it's happened. China essentially attacked us deliberately with a biological weapon using the plausible deniability factor of, oops, it was an accident. It managed to escape from a lab, etc. Meanwhile, 100,000 Americans are dead. The economy shut down. The global economy shut down. Tens of thousands around the world have been killed, have suffered needlessly. This could have been contained within mainland Asia. It was very deliberately sent out. It's becoming clearer and clearer as more and more information comes out. And keep an eye out, watch, because now they're actually starting to talk about it apparently on the news. I didn't know they were even talking about this stuff until just now. We were attacked. They used the opportunity when we were in disarray to break out, kind of like when Hitler broke out across Western Europe. They broke out into the South China Sea and made it super official. And then, thank goodness we have Trump, because he has had a profoundly robust response to the point where we've changed our strategic doctrine regarding China, but that was already in the works. That's not like that came overnight, but we released it overnight. At least the bizarre version that was meant to throw everybody off. The actual one is a lot more disturbing. That one hasn't been released, but the woman who was the former deputy national security advisor to Trump, she knows her crap, and she still has high-level context, and she was like, these people are by these people, I mean these people running this policy with China and the Trump administration. She was like, they're way more hawkish than people think. Trump gets a second term. She said, we're going to see the most robust, aggressive policy against China that we've ever had if Trump gets a second term, and he most likely will. So they attacked us. They used the pandemonium that they created to break out into the South China Sea and put a whole bunch of other stuff, more military assets that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to justify under normal circumstances. And we wouldn't have been able to counter with a show of force because our aircraft carriers and our strike groups are put up in port because their guys are sick with coronavirus. We responded once they got better, and then even when they were recuperating, we started sending out ships. We changed our doctrine. We started doing these unplanned flight missions, whereas before they were on a clock, apparently, which is dumb. But we've changed that around. And they're not only flight missions, but they're heavy flight missions, no pun intended. B-1 heavy bombers, that's a big deal. 2 of them, that's a big, big deal. Those are more capable than B-52s, to my understanding, in terms of payload capacity. Not to mention their stealth capability and all that. I have to drink water, but I don't have any sitting here. So, we responded. We've been surging nonstop, and we've been also doing war games in the South China Sea, right next to the Philippines. Right, if you Google map this crap as I'm talking and look at 9-line and look at the geographic area, China's claimed millions of nautical square miles as sovereign territory. China's saying, hey, if you come into the South China Sea, it's as if you invaded China proper. That's, of course, being contested as of now, but in 10 years, if we have the wrong president in the White House and when the war starts, because they're not going to start a war under, well, it looks like they may have already, under Trump. But it all depends who's in the White House, because you don't want to capitulate, but I'm getting off track. Trump has had a robust response, and now everyone's looking at China as to what they're going to do. Because this is all very fluid. That's why I'm making a point to date this. Again, May 23rd, 2020. This is all very fluid. So that's kind of where we're at now. And when I was reading these sources as to what we've surge deployed over just the past month and a half, and the way that we've surge deployed it, and the audacity to park right off their coast like that, we haven't done something like that for a long. That's a bold move right there. To go into the South China Sea at all is a big challenge for China. They don't like that. That makes them look really bad. To pull up all the way through the South China Sea to park 100 miles off their coast, that's a big middle finger to them. And we had a heavy force sitting there off their coast too. There were 2 escort ships that were meant to shoot down either whether it's an aircraft or whether it's a missile. They're meant to shoot them. They were destroyers, and then they had the USS America, which can land 3,000 Marines and has helicopter gunships on it. And who knows what kind of submarines. I was talking about the Philippines. While all this is going on, all these surge deployments, at the same time, we're running these war games right off the sea, in the South China Sea off the Philippines. We're running these war games with the United States Air Force and the Marines working in tandem on air, ground, working on integrated operations, also with surface ships and submarines. So we're doing all sorts of crazy stuff, preparing, and it's who's taking the next shot. So far, China attacked us, and then they surged into the South China Sea. We've responded in kind, and now we're at this really bizarre, tense stalemate where who's going to do the next thing? And what is that thing going to be? I'm waiting for Trump to have his press release where he lays out the full case against China and what they did regarding the coronavirus, and then at the end, he'll come up and he'll read his punishment. Whether that's going to be like China's going to pay us back. We've had to expend $3 trillion plus. China's going to pay us back in the form of tariffs, or else they're going to do it some other way. He said sanctions are worthless. Why use sanctions? You can just use tariffs. We're bringing supply chains back from China, back from other countries, so that if a war or if a pandemic like this happens again, we won't have to rely on Turkey to send us ventilators. Okay, we won't have to rely on, like, we actually at one point the French purchased 4 million masks from China, and we swooped into they were on the tarmac. They were about to be loaded up into the cargo plane for France. We swooped in. We paid 4 times as much, and we stole them from France. I mean, it's country versus country when it comes down to it. So we're bringing our supply lines back here. So, and that's the whole reason why this aluminum and this steel tariff war crap went into effect. When you start losing tanks and planes in battle, you need to replace them. And if you get your steel and your aluminum from another country, and if that country has ties with your enemy, that's going to make things a little bit dicey. You may not get the steel you need. You may not be able to make the tanks you need to make. It says that it's about to end soon. If you're interested, leave comments. I can make another one. What I'm trying to say is it looks like this war that I've been predicting has begun officially. The Cold War has been officially announced, and it looks like they're now taking steps slowly. Bizarrely enough, it started out with this pandemic. I never would have thought. I always thought a missile blitz or something, but this pandemic, they took advantage of the chaos. We've responded. Now it's China's turn, and we have not finished. The world is very pissed at China. Trump and his people are very pissed at China. They know they're going to have to do something, and they're going to do something. We'll see. Roundhouse out. Boom. Hit it.